The sound of footsteps moves slowly along a narrow path of packed earth. Morning light settles gently over stone walls and low roofs. Hands that once held nets and tools now gather what little remains for the day. A simple meal is shared in silence. There is no sense yet of history being made. Only men waking, walking, eating, and wondering what the day will demand of them. When we imagine the disciples of Jesus, we often picture them only at sacred moments, listening to teachings, witnessing miracles, standing near events that changed the world. But what happened in between? What did their days actually look like when no crowds were gathered, when no words were recorded, when life was simply being lived? 2,000 years ago, following Jesus was not an abstract idea. It was a physical, demanding, uncertain way of life. It meant dust on the skin, hunger in the body, long roads under the sun, and nights without assurance of shelter. These men were not saints carved from marble. They were ordinary people shaped by routine, fatigue, responsibility, and quiet faith. In this documentary, we will step into that overlooked space, the daily life of the disciples as it was truly lived. By understanding their ordinary days, we come closer to understanding the words of the Gospels themselves. Welcome to Legacy of the Scriptures. If this kind of biblical history matters to you, consider subscribing. Morning in Galilee did not begin with urgency. It began with light. Soft, angled sunlight slipped between hills and stone walls, touching packed earth floors and low doorways. Roosters cried somewhere beyond the village. Smoke rose slowly from small hearths as hands stirred embers left from the night before. Life resumed not with expectation, but with habit. Before they were disciples, these men lived ordinary mornings like this. Their lives were shaped by repetition. Nets needed mending, boats required care, tools were checked, sandals adjusted, water drawn. The day did not ask who they would become, it only demanded work. Most of the men who would later follow Jesus were not educated in schools or trained for leadership. They were fishermen, laborers, craftsmen. Their knowledge came from bodies more than books, hands that knew weight, balance, resistance. They understood seasons, weather, hunger, and fatigue. Faith was present, but woven quietly into routine rather than spoken aloud. Family life framed these early hours. Homes were small, often shared by several generations. Privacy was rare. A man's identity was not individual, but communal. Son of, brother of, worker among others. Responsibility came early and remained constant. To stop working was not a spiritual choice, it was a risk. Religion, too, belonged to the rhythm of daily life. Prayers were familiar words, spoken without performance. Scripture was heard more often than read. Faith did not separate the sacred from the ordinary. It rested inside it. God was acknowledged in the same breath as the day's labor. This context matters because when Jesus called these men, he did not remove them from comfort. He interrupted stability. Following him meant stepping away from predictability into uncertainty. The cost was not symbolic, it was immediate and practical. Leaving nets meant leaving income. Walking away from a tax table meant walking away from protection. Following meant trusting without understanding how tomorrow would be managed. And yet, none of this happened in a moment of drama. It began in ordinary places, during ordinary hours, among men who expected nothing more from the day than work and rest. To understand the disciples, we must resist the urge to imagine them already transformed. At the beginning, they were not brave. They were not wise. They were simply present, tired, responsible, rooted in daily necessity. The call of Jesus did not erase their past. It carried it forward. The discipline of routine, the endurance of labor, the humility of small lives, all of it shaped how they would later listen, struggle, misunderstand, and remain. Before miracles, before sermons, before roads stretched endlessly ahead, there were mornings like this, quiet, grounded, unremarkable. And it was from this ordinary beginning that everything else would unfold. Following Jesus quickly became a life measured in distance, not distance as an idea, but as weight on the body, feet pressed into dirt and stone. Sandals wore thin, Legs ached before the sun reached its height. The road was not a metaphor. It was the place where learning happened. Travel in first-century Galilee was slow and exposed. There were no straight paths, no signs pointing the way. Routes followed terrain, fields, and memory. Hills rose unexpectedly. Valleys trapped heat. Dust clung to skin and clothing, settling into folds that could not be shaken free. Walking was not exercise. It was survival. The disciples walked behind Jesus, beside him, sometimes ahead, often confused about where they were going or why. Journeys were long enough for silence to grow heavy. There were hours when nothing was said, when the only sounds were breath, insects, and the steady rhythm of steps. In those moments, faith was not expressed in words. It was expressed by continuing forward. Walking together reshaped relationships. There was no privacy on the road. Tensions surfaced quickly. Hunger shortened patience. Fatigue exposed character. Disagreements were unavoidable, yet unavoidable was also dependence. No one traveled alone. The road demanded community. Food was uncertain. Sometimes hospitality appeared unexpectedly. A home opened, bread offered, water shared. Other times there was nothing but what they carried. The disciples learned to accept help without pride and scarcity without despair. Trust became practical. It meant continuing even when tomorrow's provision was unknown. Jesus taught while walking. His words were spoken into movement, not quiet rooms. Parables rose from fields they passed, from seeds underfoot, from labor unfolding around them. Teaching did not pause life. It emerged from it. The disciples learned to listen while tired, to remember while distracted, to carry words as they carried themselves, slowly and imperfectly. These roads stripped away illusions. There was no room for comfort or performance. Following meant exposure to weather, to criticism, to doubt. Villages could welcome or reject them. Some doors opened, others closed firmly. The disciples began to understand that belonging to Jesus did not guarantee safety or approval. Yet the road also formed endurance. Each step made the next possible. Each shared journey built quiet resilience. They were being shaped not by dramatic moments, but by persistence. Long before they would understand who Jesus truly was, they learned what it meant to stay with him, to keep walking, to remain present even when clarity did not come. The road did not explain everything, but it taught them how to follow. Hunger was never theoretical for the disciples. It arrived quietly, tightening the body long before words were spoken. It followed long hours of walking, empty mornings, and days when no invitation came. Food was not assumed. It was anticipated, hoped for, sometimes absent. Meals in the first century were simple and unadorned. Bread was the foundation, dense, coarse, broken by hand rather than cut. Fish, when available, was dried or cooked quickly over small fires. Olives, figs, or lentils might appear, depending on season and place. There was no abundance, only sufficiency when it came. The disciples ate together because there was no other way. There were no separate portions, no private plates. What was shared fully. Hunger erased hierarchy. It revealed character. Those who ate learned to wait. Those who served learned to notice others first. Much of Jesus' teaching unfolded around food, not because meals were sacred moments set apart, but because they were unavoidable parts of life. Eating gathered people. It slowed movement. It created space for listening. Words spoken over bread carried weight because they entered bodies already aware of need. Hospitality shaped these moments. When a home opened its door, it offered more than food. It offered safety, rest, and recognition. To accept a meal was to accept dependence. Pride had to be set aside. Gratitude replaced control. Not every village welcomed them. Some nights ended without a table. On those days, hunger became a teacher. It sharpened attention. It revealed vulnerability. The disciples learned that following Jesus did not shield them from want. It invited them into it. And yet, food was never just sustenance. It became memory. Certain meals lingered in the mind long after they were finished. The act of breaking bread together formed bonds that words alone could not. Communion was not invented later. It was practiced quietly, repeatedly, long before it was named. When Jesus spoke of bread, the disciples understood not as theologians, but as hungry men. When he spoke of provision, they remembered days when there was none. Meaning entered through experience. These shared meals, whether abundant or sparse, trained them in attention to one another, to the present moment, to the grace hidden inside the ordinary. The table, when it appeared, became a place of learning, and hunger, when it returned, reminded them why they followed at all. Night came quickly in the first century. There were no lamps lining the roads, no distant glow from cities on the horizon. As the sun lowered behind the hills, shadows stretched long across the land, and movement slowed. What could be done in daylight needed to be finished. Darkness was not an extension of the day, it was a boundary. For the disciples, night often brought uncertainty. Shelter was never guaranteed. Sometimes a home welcomed them, offering a corner of a room, a roof of beams and packed earth, the faint warmth of bodies resting close together. Other nights, there was no door to knock on, only open ground, only the sound of wind moving through grass and stone. Sleeping outdoors was not romantic. The ground was hard. Cloaks served as bedding, protection, and warmth. Fires were small and carefully tended, if they were lit at all. Silence pressed in, broken by insects, distant animals, or the shifting of someone trying to find rest. Sleep came lightly, never fully. Vulnerability was greatest at night. A man could not see what approached. Weather changed without warning. Cold settled into the body and remained until morning. For those used to stable homes, this instability wore down confidence. The disciples learned quickly that following Jesus meant relinquishing control not only of the future, but of the next few hours. Jesus did not remove himself from this reality. He shared it. He rested where they rested, endured what they endured. There was no separation between teacher and follower when night fell. Leadership did not provide comfort. Presence did. These nights reshaped expectations. The disciples could no longer rely on routine for security. Instead, they learned to rely on one another. Trust deepened in shared fragility. Fear was not eliminated, but it was carried together. In the quiet hours, doubts surfaced. Questions lingered without answers. Why this path? Why this uncertainty? Faith was not expressed in speeches. It was expressed by staying, by not leaving when comfort disappeared. Morning always returned. Light crept back over the land, revealing bodies stiff from the cold, eyes heavy with little rest. And still, they rose. They gathered what they had. They followed. Night taught them that security was not a place. It was a decision made again each day. As days passed, the disciples became visible, not famous, but noticed. A group of men moving together, leaving familiar places, lingering where others passed quickly. In villages and along roads, eyes followed them. Curiosity came first. Judgment followed soon after. In first century Judea and Galilee, reputation mattered deeply. A man's place in society was tied to family, trade, and religious observance. To step outside expected roles invited suspicion. The disciples, by leaving their former lives, unsettled these expectations. Some were questioned directly. Why had they abandoned their work? Who was this teacher they followed? Others were judged silently. Whispers passed between neighbors. Familiar faces looked away. The cost of discipleship included social distance. Religious authorities watched carefully. Groups formed around teachers often dissolved quickly, but this one endured. Jesus did not conform to expected patterns. He taught without institutional approval. He moved freely among those considered questionable. and the men who followed him shared in the consequences of that association. For the disciples, this scrutiny created tension. They were still learning, still unsure. To be judged for a commitment they did not yet fully understand required humility. They learned to stand without defense, to accept misunderstanding without retaliation. This exposure reshaped identity. They were no longer defined solely by their past, but neither were they secure in their future. They occupied a space of in-between, no longer who they were, not yet who they would become. Faith, in this context, was quiet endurance. It meant continuing despite doubt, despite criticism, despite the absence of affirmation. The disciples learned that following Jesus did not grant moral superiority. It required patience. Being seen changed them, being judged refined them, and slowly they learned to remain. The decision to follow Jesus disrupted more than routine. It disrupted survival. Work in the ancient world was not flexible. Income depended on presence. A fisherman who did not fish did not eat. A craftsman absent from his tools lost customers quickly. There was no safety net to fall back on. For the disciples, leaving work was not symbolic. It was costly. Families were affected. Responsibilities shifted. Some ties strained under the weight of uncertainty. The choice to follow Jesus echoed far beyond the individual. Yet work did not disappear from their lives. It changed form. They learned new kinds of labor: walking, listening, serving, assisting. Tasks were unplanned and often unnoticed. Carrying supplies, finding water, arranging places to rest, supporting one another in small practical ways. This redefinition of work challenged assumptions. Value was no longer measured by productivity or income. It was measured by faithfulness, by presence, by willingness. Jesus did not promise compensation. He did not outline future security. Instead, he invited trust. For men accustomed to earning their keep through effort, this was disorienting. Trust required relinquishing control. Over time, they learned that work could exist without ownership. That contribution did not always produce visible results. That meaning was not always immediate. This reshaping of labor prepared them for what lay ahead. They were being trained not to accumulate, but to give, not to secure, but to remain open. Work had once defined them. Now, following did. The disciples heard teachings they did not fully grasp. Parables lingered without explanation. Statements unsettled assumptions. Silence followed questions. Learning in this context was not structured. There were no lessons outlined in advance. Understanding came slowly, unevenly, often after failure. The disciples misunderstood frequently. They argued among themselves. They asked questions that revealed how little they comprehended. And yet they stayed. Jesus did not rush clarity. He allowed confusion to exist. He permitted space for growth without resolution. This demanded patience from those who followed him. For men accustomed to tangible results, this was difficult. Faith unfolded without immediate confirmation. Learning required humility, the willingness to remain a student without assurance of mastery. Gradually, understanding formed through experience rather than explanation, through witnessing compassion, through enduring difficulty, through observing how Jesus responded to rejection, need, and suffering. The disciples learned not by grasping concepts, but by inhabiting a way of life. Truth became recognizable through repetition and presence. They did not yet know where this path would lead. They only knew they were still walking. Nothing about these days seemed monumental at the time. There were no markers announcing transformation, no awareness that history was being shaped. And yet, these ordinary days formed the foundation of everything that followed: the walking, the hunger, the nights without shelter, the judgment, the work left behind, the questions unanswered. This was the soil in which faith took root, not in moments of spectacle, but in persistence, in choosing to remain present when clarity was absent. The disciples were not extraordinary because they understood everything. They were extraordinary because they stayed. When later events would test them beyond measure, it was this daily life that sustained them. The habits of endurance, the memory of shared meals, the knowledge that faith had already been lived in difficulty. Understanding the disciples means understanding this hidden formation. Their greatness was not sudden. It was slow. It was human, and it began here. When we read the Gospels, it is easy to move quickly from event to event, teaching to miracle, miracle to conflict, conflict to crucifixion and resurrection. But between these moments lies a life that is often overlooked. By entering the daily experience of the disciples, we encounter a Jesus who walked slowly, taught patiently, and formed people through ordinary days. We see men shaped not by certainty, but by faith practiced in uncertainty. This historical understanding does not diminish the gospel. It deepens it. It brings Jesus closer to human experience. It reminds us that transformation often unfolds quietly, through routine faithfulness rather than dramatic change. The disciples did not begin as heroes. They became witnesses because they lived the life they were given, one day at a time, alongside Jesus. And perhaps that is the invitation still present today, to read the scriptures not as distant stories, but as lived reality. If this journey into the daily life of the disciples has helped you see the Gospels with new eyes, you are welcome to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your reflections also matter. Feel free to share in the comments how understanding the ordinary lives of the disciples shapes the way you read the words of Jesus.